A lovely gentleman, very bright. Unfortunately, we could never be friends.
I think that Vegetable Rebellion is probably the worst show I've ever seen.
The epitome of bad TV.
Sir?
Kind of orange with the little yellow turtle dicky thing. I didn't like.
Do you wish me to prepare a 6-foot trench for Dr. Smith while we are waiting to communicate with Professor Robinson?
You remember a cowardly doctor, a robot waving its arms, a man in a carrot costume. That is not the show Irwin Allen made.
I think that is very funny.
Silence, you sniggering cinderbox!
His cost $600,000, more than any pilot in television history.
Since the others serve no purpose, they must be liquidated.
Destroy everyone.
He hired a cinematographer with 3 Academy Awards. He got Groucho Marx to help pay for it. Then he screened it for CBS. And the executives laughed all the way through. 60 years later, almost nobody knows what they were laughing at.
Judy and I will protect you. Let's go. Come on.
None of it. Ask anyone who grew up in front of a television set in the 60s what Lost in Space was, and you get the same 3 answers. Every time, without fail. The robot. Danger, Will Robinson. Dr. Smith clutching his back, calling a machine a bubble-headed booby. And somewhere in that 3rd season, a man in a full-body foam rubber carrot costume putting Smith on trial for picking a flower. That's the show. That's what survived. 6 decades of syndication sanded everything else away until all that was left in the American memory was a comedy about a coward and a robot who couldn't stand each other. Here's the part nobody ever tells you. None of it existed. Not the robot, not Dr. Smith, not even the Jupiter 2. When Irwin Allen shot the pilot for Lost in Space in the winter of 1964, not one of those things was in it. Not one. The ship had a different name, the family had a different job, and the show had a completely different point, one that has never been explained to you in 60 years by anybody.
William, let's go in. You first and turn on the lights.
Danger! Danger!
What Allen filmed was not a comedy. It was not camp. It was not really even made for children. It was a serious, expensive, technically extraordinary piece of science fiction, and it has been sitting in the dark since 1964 while you watched The Replacement and assumed it was the original.
You are responsible for all the mistakes.
Hold your tongue, you bubble-headed booby.
It was called No Place to Hide, and you were never supposed to see it. 30 years buried. It never aired. Not in 1965, not in 1966, not for 3 decades. Think about what that means. $600,000 of film, the most anyone had ever spent on a pilot, shot, cut, scored, finished, and then simply put in a vault and left there while the show it was made for ran for 3 years on national television.
When unessential personnel are found alone, destroy.
For 30 years, it moved through the underground. Collectors traded it on videotape like contraband, dubbed and redubbed until the picture went to mush and the sound crawled. If you wanted to see the real Lost in Space, you had to know somebody. The overwhelming majority of the show's fans lived their entire lives and died without ever seeing one frame of it. The first time an ordinary person could legally watch it was 1995, a mail-order videotape, 31 years after it was exposed.
It's important custom that amigos must drink together.
Now, there's an obvious explanation for a buried pilot, and everybody assumes it. The network hated it, it was bad, it tested badly, and they shelved it. That's not what happened, not even close. CBS didn't hate No Place to Hide. They bought it in the room, on the spot, for more money than almost anything else on television that year, which leaves a hole in the middle of this story that nobody has ever filled. They loved it, and then they made sure you'd never see it. To understand why, you have to start with what Irwin Allen thought he was building, and that begins with money. Nobody spins that. Irwin Allen was not a hack. Get that straight first, because history has been vicious to him. Today, if he's remembered at all, he's the master of disaster, the man behind the Poseidon Adventure and the Towering Inferno, the producer who flooded ships, set skyscrapers alight, and never met a stunt he wouldn't shoot twice.
Hard left! Get up a mayday!
That reputation is real. It's also the second half of his life. Before any of it, Irwin Allen won an Academy Award. for a documentary. He was a serious filmmaker long before he was a showman, and in 1964 he was writing his first television hit, a submarine series called Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. He'd proved he could do it. Now he wanted to do it bigger. So he walked into the programming department at CBS and pitched a man named James Aubrey. Allen described his own thinking plainly years afterward. America had become very space-minded. CBS wanted a family show. He took the space and the family and put them together. Aubrey was impressed.
Bollocks.
Bollocks.
Bollocks. Bollocks.
And what Allen did next should stop you cold. To finance the pilot, he assembled backing from CBS, from 20th Century Fox, and from two comedians. Groucho Marx put money into Lost in Space. So did Red Skelton. Two of the biggest comic performers in the entire country helped pay for a show that contained no comedy whatsoever. Not a joke in it, not one line. Hold on to that, it comes back at the end of this video, and when it does, it changes everything you're about to watch. The final budget landed at $600,000. In 1964, that made No Place to Hide the most expensive pilot ever filmed. Not the most expensive science fiction pilot, not the most expensive on CBS, the most expensive pilot ever made, full stop, in the history of the medium. And here's what tells you who Allen really was. He didn't spend it on stars. 3 Oscars deep. He spent it on the crew. All of it.
Well, I volunteered to do the masculine chores, you know, like mow the grass, clean out the garage, change a few lights.
Since the other male members of this family are absent, I am in command.
His cinematographer was Winton Hoch, 3 Academy Awards on the man's shelf. He had shot She Wore a Yellow Ribbon and The Quiet Man for John Ford. Understand what that means. That is not a television cameraman. That is one of the finest eyes in the history of American cinema. A man who painted with a camera for one of the greatest directors who ever lived. And Irwin Allen pointed him at a TV pilot. Look at the pilot footage and you can see it. The light does things television light didn't do. The landscapes have depth. It doesn't look like 1965 television. It looks like a movie because a movie cameraman shot it.
Well, the big climactic scene wherein Paul Newman and Steve McQueen go up on the roof, successfully explode the huge water tanks which crash through the top floor.
His effects supervisor was L.B. Abbott, an Emmy winner who would go on to take an Academy Award of his own. And the man who designed the ship was Robert Kinoshita, the same designer who had built Robbie the Robot for Forbidden Planet 8 years earlier. The most famous machine in the history of science fiction came out of that man's pencil. Read that list again. 3 Oscars behind the camera, an Emmy on effects, the designer of Robbie drawing the spacecraft, Groucho Marx's check in the budget for a television pilot in 1964.
In which he introduced American culture to such popular phrases as, the pain, you bumbling booby, and never fear, Smith is here.
Never fear, Smith is indeed.
Nobody assembles a team like that for a joke. Nobody spends like that on something they think is disposable. Every single decision Allen made says the same thing. This man believed he was making something that mattered. Which leaves one question, the only question this whole story turns on. What was actually in it? 6 doctorates aboard. Here's the film he shot. It's October 1997. Earth is overpopulated, dangerously, terminally overpopulated, and the United States launches a single family on a 98-year journey to Alpha Centauri, asleep in suspended animation the whole way, to find out whether human beings can live anywhere else at all.
There's nothing to discuss. Jupiter 2's destination is Alpha Centauri. End of discussion.
Indeed.
Not soldiers, not test pilots, not astronauts. A family. And every one of them was brilliant. John Robinson held a doctorate. Maureen Robinson held a doctorate, her own, in her own field, not her husband's. Don West, who in the series you remember is a hotshot military pilot flirting with Judy, was in the pilot a doctor of geology. And the children weren't children in any ordinary sense. They were written as prodigies. 6 people on that ship, barely a person aboard without a degree.
The Dr. Smith character, which so many people remember you for, and as I quoted, popular phrases that have become a part of our culture.
And there was nothing on board to fight. No villain, no saboteur, no traitor. The production material describes the Robinsons as a happy crew with no internal conflict, a family that genuinely likes each other, facing outward, together. So what threatens them? Weather, terrain, distance. A meteor storm that knocks the ship sideways, a planet that turns on them, giants in the earth. The enemy is the universe, not a man.
You're probably thinking, what kind of man would use a parent's love for his own preservation?
And the ship isn't the Jupiter 2, It's the Gemini 12, a stripped-down single-deck saucer, no airlock, no seats for the pilot, barely any controls at the front, no elevator, no landing gear, 6 people and nothing spare. It carries the chariot, it carries the jetpack. That's the inventory. That's the whole ship. 52 minutes of black and white film that plays less like Saturday morning television and a great deal more like an actual motion picture.
And I remember they used purple lipstick, and they had to gray my hair, and they used yellow grease paint, which never quite washed out.
Though it wasn't perfect. Somebody didn't do the arithmetic. A 98-year flight to a star 4 and a bit light years away. At those speeds, you could make the round trip several times over and still be early. But nobody in that room was going to care about the math, because there was a much bigger crack running through the whole thing, and it was sitting right there in the name. Someone else's name. Allen didn't want to call it Lost in Space at all. He wanted to call it Space Family Robinson. That was the title. That was always the title, because the entire show was a science fiction rewrite of the Swiss Family Robinson, Johann David Wyss's shipwreck novel from 1812. Island becomes planet, ocean becomes vacuum, pirates become aliens. That's why they're the Robinsons. The name was telling you for 3 straight seasons, and not one person in America heard it. He couldn't use it. There was already a Gold Key comic called Space Family Robinson, and there was a Walt Disney film project of the same name, never produced, but Disney threatened to sue anyway over the play on Swiss Family Robinson.
Every son wants to feel that his father's the greatest, that he can succeed in anything.
And you can, too.
No, son, I can't.
So he settled for Lost in Space. And even that didn't end it. A woman named Hilda Boehm filed a claim against Allen and CBS just before the series went to air. It was settled. Decades later, a filmmaker named Ib Melchior claimed the whole concept came off a 1964 treatment of his, and a fan named Ed Schifris wrote an entire book laying the two outlines side by side trying to prove it. Now here's why any of that matters, and it isn't the lawsuits.
You ran the last 300 yards in 3 minutes. A record for snails.
Irwin Allen believed he was making hard science fiction, a serious film about the future. He was actually making a 150-year-old adventure novel in silver jumpsuits, and everybody could see it except him. So in late 1964, he took his $600,000 film to CBS. He sat down in the dark with the men who would decide whether it lived, and he expected the professional silence you get when serious people watch serious work. That is not what he got. Then they laughed. They laughed. From the beginning. All the way through, every reel, the most expensive pilot ever committed to film. 3 Academy Awards behind the camera, Groucho Marx's money in the budget, the designer of Robbie the Robot on the ship, a family of doctorates fighting an entire planet with nothing but their minds. And the executives at CBS television giggled through the whole thing.
Now, do you intend to destroy the only means we have of getting back where we belong?
Irwin Allen was shocked. Every account agrees on that. He was chagrined, embarrassed, standing in front of the men who were about to decide his future, and they were laughing at him. And then something happened that has confused people for 60 years. They bought it. On the spot. In the room. And not cheaply either. They handed Lost in Space a higher per episode budget than almost anything else on the network.
Oh, the pain. The pain.
Clip CBS laughed at Irwin Allen's pilot and then paid a premium for it. Now, every telling of this story rushes to smooth that over. The laughter wasn't derision, they say. The executives were enjoying themselves. It was delight. Pleasure. A compliment, really. Fine, take it at face value, but then ask the obvious question, the one nobody asks. If it was delight, why did Allen walk out of that room humiliated? He was in there. He watched their faces. He had 25 years in Hollywood and an Academy Award on his shelf. He had sat through 1,000 screenings. This is a man who knew, in his bones, the difference between a room that's enjoying itself and a room that's laughing at something. He heard something in that laughter, and it hurt him. Then CBS handed him a list. The list arrived. They wanted changes, very specific ones. The ship had to go. The Gemini 12 was redesigned and renamed. It became the Jupiter 2, and they went back to Kinoshita, the man who had drawn the original, and had him rebuild his own work. A second deck, an elevator, living quarters, a dining room, a laboratory, a dock. Read that list of rooms again. A dining room, a lab, a dock for something. They didn't just make the ship bigger, they turned a vehicle into a home, because the show CBS was buying wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't a journey, it was going to live somewhere, week after week, for years. Then came the two that ended everything.
Foreign agent trying to disrupt the project, and then it changed into a very comical and very warm
certainly
character.
changed it, didn't I?
Yes, you did, and that all came from you, did it not?
Yes, it did.
They wanted a recurring antagonist, somebody who could generate conflict every single week without the expense of building a new monster from scratch. And they wanted a robot. So Kinoshita, the man who had already given the world Robbie, the man who had just drawn Allen's beautiful Sirius spacecraft, sat down and built the machine that would make the whole thing a comedy. He nicknamed it Blinky because it never stopped blinking. You know it as B9. And Allen hired a New York stage actor named Jonathan Harris to play a saboteur called Dr. Zachary Smith. Everyone believed wrong. Here's where almost everyone gets this story wrong, including people who have been telling it for 40 years.
I wish you'd go away. You've been acting very strange lately, Dr. Smith.
You've heard it. Smith was written to be killed off after 5 episodes. He was a disposable villain. And he only survived because Jonathan Harris was clever enough to rewrite his own part and outmaneuver the producers. A brilliant actor hijacking a drama and turning it into his own comedy. It's a wonderful story. Harris himself put it down. In 1997, he told Starlog magazine flatly he was hired to be in every episode. From the beginning. It was never a 5-episode job. It was never a trial run. There was no plan to kill him.
With all my lights, I can double as a passable Christmas tree.
Which means the version of history everybody repeats, that Lost in Space started out serious and gradually became silly, is simply false. It wasn't a drift, it wasn't a slow decline, it wasn't an actor hijacking anything. CBS didn't discover they wanted a comedy villain over 3 seasons. They ordered one before a single frame of the series was shot. The silliness was in the purchase order. It was there in writing before anybody rolled a camera. And once you know that, the strangest thing in this entire story starts to make sense. They weren't born. The pilot never aired, but Irwin Allen had $600,000 of film sitting in a can, and Allen did not throw things away. Ever. It was the defining trait of his career. He recycled between shows.
You're way out of line. You're twisting the facts. I would have gone.
He recycled inside shows. The footage from No Place to Hide was carefully worked into the early episodes of Season 1. The meteor storm, the crash, the Cyclops, the chariot crossing the ridge. If you've seen the first several episodes of Lost in Space, you have already watched a great deal of the buried pilot. You just had no idea what you were looking at. But that created a problem. A very specific, very strange problem. Because the pilot had no Dr. Smith in it, and no robot. They didn't exist when that film was exposed. They were invented afterwards, on a network's instruction, months later. So every single time an episode reached for pilot footage, the 2 most popular characters on the show were simply absent, not there, gone. And the fix was to write them out. Over and over in those early episodes, Smith and the robot conveniently stay behind at the ship. There's always a reason given. There's always an excuse.
I'm sure I followed the assembly procedure properly.
Well, if you did, what's his solar battery doing out here?
And the reason is never once the real one. The real reason is that they hadn't been born yet. Sit with that. The 2 most beloved characters in the entire series were being written around the ghost, around the version of Lost in Space that had been shot, paid for, buried, and was now being quietly cannibalized for parts, while the show that replaced it pretended it had never existed. Every one of those "you stay with the ship, Dr. Smith" lines is scar tissue. Lost in Space was lying about itself inside its first month on the air, and it never stopped. So we come back to the only thing left, that room in 1964, and what those men actually heard.
Oh, cool it, man. Will's a big boy now, and I'm a big girl. So why don't you just go back with the rest of the olders and leave us to do our thing?
What it was really about. Irwin Allen walked out believing CBS had missed the point, that they were fools in suits who'd laughed at the best work of his life. He was wrong. They hadn't missed anything. They'd seen his show more clearly than he had. Because look at what was actually on that screen. A family with no conflict in it. 2 parents with matching doctorates, children who were prodigies, a geologist with a PhD, 6 people, every one of them earnest and gifted and cooperative and without a single flaw among them. A 150-year-old shipwreck novel, played absolutely straight in silver jumpsuits. Here's what Lost in Space was really about. It was about competence. That's the thesis buried in that vault. Not a family that gets lost. The most capable human beings on Earth drop somewhere that doesn't care how capable they are, solving it with nothing but their minds and each other. And that is a 1964 idea. Mercury behind them, Gemini in the air, Apollo coming. A country that genuinely, unironically believed that the answer to any problem was to find the smartest people in the room and let them work. Now remember who paid for it. Groucho Marx, Red Skelton, two men who made their entire living knowing exactly what an audience finds funny. CBS sat in the dark and watched perfect people being perfect at each other for 52 minutes, and they heard the comedy in it instantly. That's what the laughter was. Not mockery, not delight either. It was a diagnosis. And every item on that list was the prescription. A villain to break the perfect family. A robot to break the perfect science. They already knew the show was funny. They just wanted it to be funny on purpose. Allen went and built it, and it worked. More than 80 episodes, 60 years of reruns, a permanent place in the memory of an entire generation. But look at what it cost. The show that was really about competence became a show about a coward sabotaging it for laughs. A country that in 1964 believed brilliant people could get us to Alpha Centauri spent 1968 watching a man in a carrot suit. Irwin Allen never lost Lost in Space to Jonathan Harris. He lost it in a screening room before a frame of the series was ever shot to a sound he mistook for an insult. They laughed because they were right. And that's what Lost in Space was really about. Not a family that got lost. A show that did. If this changed what you thought you knew about that spaceship, tell me one thing in the comments. Do you think CBS saved Lost in Space or ruined it? Because I've gone back and forth on it a dozen times and I honestly still don't know. More like this on the way. Subscribe.